Welcome to FO Talks. With me is Elliot Neaman. He is one of our most brilliant authors. This is his first video for our YouTube channel. And today we are talking about a very important issue, new rupture. EU and Canada pivot away from the US. Elliot, welcome.
Thank you very much. Very kind of you, Atul, to exaggerate like that.
Well, I mean, you write beautifully. At least
Appreciate
the
that.
editing team loves your writing. And let's talk about this new rupture. Of course, I'm alluding to Mark Carney's speech in Davos. Of course, I'm also alluding to your article in May. And paint us a picture of how the EU and Canada are facing this period of rupture with the US, the dominant power in the Western world, the creator of the normative post-World War II order, and the country that created not just the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, the United Nations, the World Trade Organization, but pretty much most of what we have come to associate with the modern globalized world. So take it away, Elliot.
Thanks, Atul. Great question. Just a little quick background for the listeners just about me. So I am Canadian by birth, grew up in Vancouver and went to the University of British Columbia. I left after getting my BA in sociology, actually, and studied in Zurich and then Berlin. So I spent the 1980s in Germany and Switzerland and was there when the wall fell in 1989, then went to Berkeley to study. So I grew up very much in the heart of what you just described, that transatlantic alliance with Europe firmly grounded inside the alliance with American protections so it could build out its welfare state and other good things that we love about Europe, while the Americans established this relatively benign empire and gave the world protection by protecting sea lanes and by defeating Russia in the Cold War and creating the what people call the neoliberal economic order in the 1990s, in which poverty fell drastically all around the world, and Francis Fukuyama talked about the end of history and all that. And so to watch what's going on now as an analyst and just personally is just really tough to see and makes me sad, frankly, and angry. So to get to your question, what has happened, and I think that this is fairly well established by now, is that in the second Trump administration, not so much in the first where there were guardrails, but in the second Trump administration, the United States has become, if not a rogue superpower, at least an untethered superpower from the order that had been created in the way that I just discussed. And I think that in the first Trump administration, the Europeans and the Canadians did everything they could to try to placate Trump. That was in terms of trade deals. You remember the United States-Mexico U.S. trade deal was renegotiated and simply renamed, really, but the Canadians were willing to work with Trump on that. The Europeans did everything they could to make the kinds of promises that would satisfy his demands for increased defense spending and things like that. That all fell apart in Trump 2. And now I think what we're seeing is the decoupling, the rupture that you gave as the title, which was in a speech that Mark Carney, the Canadian Prime Minister, gave at Davos. We're seeing this rupture in the United States and in Canada, where allies realize that the United States is not a reliable ally, and they're going to have to rebalance and rebuffer, which is very typical in international relations when an order breaks down. So I could go into more detail, but I'm going to wait to see what specific questions you want to ask me about that.
No, no, no. It's very interesting that you've come to the order breaking down. So, uh, paint us a clearer picture of what exactly does the breakdown of this order mean. Is it trade deals? Is it supply chains? Is it security pacts? Because everything seems to be up in the air now.
Yes, yes. My answer is yes. All to all of those. Exactly right. I think everything is up in the air right now. So let's tick them off. Let's start actually with power politics, with international relations. I think there that what you're seeing in Canada and the United States is attempts to strengthen, to buy insurance by making new kinds of alliances. So we saw Carney go to China. We've seen Carney make deals with Vietnam, with some of the South Asian countries, and also in Latin America. That is also what's happening in Europe. In Europe, because of the proximity of all these middle-sized and smaller countries, I think what you're seeing is a realignment starting in Germany of some of the Nordic states, some of the Eastern states like Poland, moving into a kind of new informal military alliance. Trade is a slightly different issue because of the EU, but certainly a new kind of military alliance. The Baltic states and Sweden and Finland are right there on Russia's border. This is existential to them in a way that it isn't for Canada or the United States. And I think what you're going to see there are these new kinds of ties that are being made, and that means economic and military cooperation, for example, in the area of defense spending. I think that's really where you're going to see it. And the Ukraine war there is the key, because the Ukrainians have emerged now as the window into which we can see how the battlefield is changing, and will be actually the battlefield of the future, using drone technology, but not only that, also cyberspace, um, and all kinds of new weapons that can be developed by smaller powers and medium powers. So the age, I just wrote about this, and I think it'll be coming in the Fair Observer. I think what you're going to see then is a big discussion inside these European countries about what exactly they're upping their defense budgets. What exactly are they going to build? Are they going to build those old-fashioned, very expensive weapons like missiles, big ships, things like that? No, I don't think so. I mean, that's always going to be there, but the real battlefield of the future is going to require these very different kinds of innovations that we're seeing on the field in the Ukraine. And what the Ukraine war is telling us is that small powers are not helpless against large superpowers. The
I mean,
Ukrainians are
just very
beating.
quickly to butt
Yeah,
in, it's not just Ukraine. Ukraine set the tempo, but Iran
yeah,
has picked up the baton, or baton, as you'd say in America, and is really sprinting ahead.
yeah.
US Navy ships are terrified of entering the Strait of Hormuz.
Right, right, exactly. So it's spread to Iran, and again, you're absolutely right. Atul, asymmetric warfare in the Ukraine, asymmetric warfare in Iran, is what has caused this huge American and Israeli, right, military superiority to not be able to actually win this war, right?
I mean,
And
it's an extraordinary superiority in terms of firepower,
right,
in terms of technology, in terms of the ability to have intelligence, deep intelligence, and yet, the Strait of Hormuz is blocked.
right, exactly. So that tells you something about where we're going. And the way I would link it then to your question is the Europeans are looking at this and saying, you know what? We're not so helpless. We can do this now.
Mm.
We're in a different kind of world order now. The superpowers are still going to exist. China and the United States are going to battle it out with the 20th century nuclear triad and with all their big
21st,
weapons.
21st, not 20th.
No, but I'm saying the no. I said that on purpose.
Yeah.
They're using the 20th century
Ah,
nuclear triad. Yeah, the triad, right?
yeah, yeah,
So
exactly.
a lot of this is grounded still in the 20th century,
Yeah.
and they're going to also develop these new capabilities for sure, right? But it's not like they're going to have a monopoly on it, right?
Mhm.
And so okay, so to anticipate where maybe we go on that, what I think we're going to see then in Europe is I think that Trump has given actually the Europeans an opening. There's a kind of silver lining to this rupture in that the Europeans now have an opportunity to take fate into their own hands. I have long argued that the Germans and the other Europeans, particularly the Germans, should be remilitarizing. They should play a larger role. For too long, they have enjoyed this kind of pacifist um, ideal, this dreamland, really, that they can just live in that world. And it started breaking down even before Trump, and now they're faced with the reality of it. And there's this famous quote from Churchill. He may not have said it, maybe it's apocryphal, but he said, "The Germans are either at your throat or at your feet," right? And I don't think that's quite fair, but it's true that the Germans tend to be either too militaristic or too pacifist. We have to find something in the middle there, right? And that's where I hope it's going.
Well, German pacifism is very new. It's only post World War II, really.
But strong and embedded in this, in the 3 or 4 generations that we're talking about, in a way that they can't imagine, or only now are being able to grapple with the fact that they're going to have to play a more responsible role, right?
Mm. So, but that is not just a German issue, that is a European issue.
Yeah.
Anywhere in the EU, people used to very cozy and comfortable welfare states
Yes.
find it difficult to be motivated to fight. And if I can take the point a little further, the Gulf countries,
Yeah.
which have extraordinary welfare states, also have a similar problem. That
Hmm.
is why we read reports in the press of 8,000 Pakistani troops coming to Saudi Arabia,
Right.
along with drone squadrons, along with a full squadron, Air Force squadron with Chinese jets.
Yes.
So it seems to be the case that any country which is cushy and comfortable doesn't really want to fight.
Absolutely true. So we can move to the Middle East now. One last comment on Europe. So for the reason I would say that the Germans have a little harder mountain to climb there is that the French, for example, have had no problem really during the Cold War
Yeah.
with their force de frappe and being involved in colonial wars and all that, and the Brits to a certain extent too. But to turn to the Middle East, it's absolutely
But
fascinating.
very
Yes.
quickly on Europe.
Yeah.
You're right, the French and the British, the two greatest colonial powers, imperial powers of the last few centuries, have maintained military might, at least to some degree, although the British military is really weak and underfunded. And there are plenty of reports on this.
Right.
Nevertheless, despite the extraordinary nature of the SAS in Britain or the Foreign Legion in France, the reality is that the British have not got involved with Iran, and
Right.
the French have been pushed out of Francophone
Right.
Afrique by Russian mercenaries. So we live
Yeah.
in a different era to an earlier one.
Absolutely correct. And that leads back to our original topic because had Trump, for example, gone to Congress and got some kind of resolution there, had he bothered to call the allies and at least tell them what was about to happen, had he in any way involved the Europeans, he would have had a much better chance, right, of dealing with this problem of the Straits. As you know, the British have minesweepers. They sent one, what was it, a couple of weeks ago, and so they would be willing, right? It's in their interest, right, to open up the Strait of Hormuz more than the Americans because we produce our own oil. But now they're looking at this deadlock and this mess and saying, "Your problem. We're not getting involved." So it goes back to that
Mhm.
theme that we were talking about. Um, on the Middle East, so you're absolutely right. It has the same thing has happened there. The Gulf states were very happy to create this kind of cuckoo land where they just were going to build up tourism and make it a safe place to do business. And this was going to be the new Arab reality, right? Get rich, modernize to a certain extent, make all these alliances with Israel included. And then this Iran war has exposed the problem that you just talked about. They can't defend themselves when it blows up, which is why every time Trump now threatens to attack, he backs off because the Saudis and the UAE, the Qataris, the Kuwaitis, they're all telling him, don't do this. We don't want a war in our backyard because we're the first to be shot at. And so, our infrastructure, our oil infrastructure will suffer. And so that's why they're having to beef up their army. The Saudis have an army of, I think, 240,000 men. But as you say, they're not really trained to do anything, right? You have to. An army is only as good as what happens when it meets reality in battle, and you have to be battle tested. And the people who are being battle tested are the Ukrainians right now.
and and the Saudis didn't perform well against the Houthis, a ragtag militia
Yeah,
south
exactly.
of their border. So let's come back to the rupture. Canada and the EU rupture
Yeah,
from the US. So you've said it'll happen in all of these things, and you mentioned Mark Carney went to China, but Canada ultimately trades with the US.
yeah.
Uh, Canadian products come down to the US. US goods and services go up to Canada. Do you think this umbilical cord can be cut off?
No, not with Canada. You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
Europe, yes, to a certain extent. Not Canada for geographic reasons and what you just mentioned. The second largest, right? The largest trading partner with the United States, actually, right? And so no, that is not going to be possible. And that's why the United States has a lot of leverage with Canada, and eventually the Canadians are going to have to make some uncomfortable accommodations. But nevertheless, I think that they can hedge well enough to increase their leverage on the other side. But it's a tiny country; it's 10% of the United States, right?
Hmm.
So
And there's talk of Canada joining the EU. There's talk of Canada selling more natural resources to China and importing Chinese electric cars.
right,
Because lest we forget, let me point one fact to you. The Brazil China trade went up 50-fold from 2001 to,
right,
say, 2024. And
right.
so if Chinese hunger for natural resources continues, it is not beyond the realm of possibility that China may have a closer relationship with Canada. Economic. I'm not talking of anything else.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely true. There's the new pipeline that Carney just greenlighted is going to take oil and liquefied natural gas to British Columbia. Where is that going? It's going to China, right?
Mm.
So that for sure is going to happen. Yes, that already was happening to a certain extent, but the Canadians are going to increase that to get leverage, right?
Mhm.
Nevertheless, it's still a small percentage of the
So there are
cross.
limits to rupture when it comes to Canada
Yeah,
and US.
yeah,
But it seems that those limits are much less when it comes to, say, Europe and the US. All across Europe,
right.
when I speak to my friends who are in politics, who are in government, when you watch the most successful podcast in Britain, The Rest is Politics, run by Rory Stewart, a Tory, and Alistair Campbell, who's Labour, and Tony Blair's former spin master. The anger, the fury, the sense of betrayal that Europeans feel vis-a-vis the US is
Yeah.
staggering. And maybe a lot of that is unfair. Maybe the Europeans do not give credit to America for subsidizing their security for decades. Nevertheless, human beings are not entirely rational creatures. And how does America walk back that public sentiment, that tide of public sentiment that has turned against the US, is the big operative question when it comes to relations between these two entities.
You're absolutely right. I love that podcast too, by the way. I also listen to it. So I think that really leads to the question of what happens after Trump.
Hmm.
Because the anger is all understandable, but as Thomas Friedman said in his piece last week, get over it. Because the reality is, we're still dependent on this order, both militarily and economically, and we have to live in it, and we have to do our best to deal with it. And we have to, the Europeans have to defend their own interests. Their interests are at stake right now in the Gulf of Hormuz. That's what he was talking about specifically. But the question is, so what happens after Trump? One of the problems with making huge changes, say in trade, for example, or certain kinds of production, is you have to have a long-term perspective. Now, nobody knows, eventually Trump is going to go, right? Just by the actuarial tables, he's going to go. And so then what? Yes, you're right. It will be difficult, no matter how different the president is, to repair this, because now the Europeans and the Canadians and everybody else is not sure if this couldn't happen again. Trump won was a kind of a fluke, but when he was elected a second time, winning 7 battleground states, winning the popular vote, that's not a fluke anymore. So somebody like Trump could have happened again. And I think, if you want to speculate on that, I think we're going to have what Britain has. In Britain, the Conservative Party broke into two. The kind of old-fashioned Tories, and then the Reform Party, and the left broke into the old Labour Party, and then this new Green Party, and then there's a couple little splinter things like this Liberal Party. Well, I think that's going to happen to the Republicans in the United States. You're going to have a MAGA faction, and you're going to have an old GOP faction that's still Reagan-esque and Bush in some ways, and the left is going to break up too. Into this more progressive wing, that's what they call themselves, right? And
AOC and Zohran Mamdani
yeah,
and Bernie
all those
Sanders. Yeah.
exactly that wing, and then a more moderate kind of, the
The
old-fashioned
Clinton
crowd.
Democrats, the Obama Democrats.
Oh, the Obama, the Clinton
Yeah.
Democrats, or the end, yeah, all that. So in that scenario, then it really depends where the next president comes out of, which of those four groups, not two parties, right?
Mhm.
And so we'll see. And that's very hard then to make decisions based on what you have no idea in 3 years who's going to be the president of the United States and what the configuration of the Congress is. So you're going to have to hedge, right? Move ahead with what we were talking about, creating new buffers, new alliances, all that kind of thing, but also prepare for the alternative, which is the United States does really try to return to the way we were before. And the reason that could happen is because permanent interests of nations don't change just because of personalities. And eventually you almost have to have a reverse to the norm, because the forces which create national interests don't change just because of a disruptor like Trump, who's just a chaos machine. And to tell you the truth, I think people are getting sick of it, of the Trump phenomenon in general and this kind of chaos, and they don't like it.
So
They were given a
you
yeah.
think the rupture may be temporary by implication?
I guess it won't be completely temporary. You can't undo what happened, but we could veer back to something more like the world we had before. And then people are going to have to adjust to that new reality, right?
Hmm.
So it's
So,
going to be an interesting mix.
So, very quickly, one of the things businesses, including American businesses, tell me repeatedly that they want certainty, they want predictability, they want stability.
Right.
All of that have gone out of the window. Making economic decisions is a nightmare. They may not say
Right.
so openly quite often because they don't want a backlash against them from MAGA or some other crowds.
Right.
And they say the rise of populism on the left worries them because that could create its own can of worms. And businesses outside have an even greater litany of woes. I ran into a German CEO who was openly wondering whether the most politic thing for Germany might be to just import Russian gas. Because right now, they are starved of energy from Qatar. They are reliant completely on the US. And in realpolitik terms, it would make sense to get gas from all three. So we are living in a very interesting time, Elliot. What do you say to that?
Well, that example of the Russian gas and oil is an example of the kinds of national interests that don't change no matter who's in power.
Yes.
That's why Merkel, I mean, Schroeder began all this, right, from the SPD. It is now
Yeah.
basically,
Well,
works for the Russian
very
government.
quickly, let's stop here for our viewers and listeners. Gerhard Schroeder was SPD. He was the German chancellor, i.e., prime minister. The Social Democrat left-leaning party in Germany. They ran a coalition, and Schroeder was a successful chancellor who brought in Hartz reforms. Angela Merkel, who succeeded him and was in power for a long time, belonged to the CDU, the Christian Democratic Union, and that's a center right party. And she also ran a coalition, and she was in power for a pretty long time. And what Elliot has just said is that the policy instituted by Gerhard Schroeder when it came to getting Russian gas and Russian oil was continued by his political adversary, Angela Merkel. So it didn't matter whether the party was left or right. The policy remained the same because it was in German national interest. Over to you, sir.
Exactly right. And that's why I would not be surprised. In fact, especially if the Ukraine war just grinds to a halt and is somehow defused, I think the Germans will eventually go back to Russia. That makes a lot of sense. But yes, that's an example where you have to a certain extent make concessions, right? In the name of the higher national interest. And so that's going to happen. Um, and the thing is, though, that with Europe now, I think the shock, right, of first of all, Greenland,
Mhm.
and then Canada, and then Ukraine war, and then the Iran war really have changed things fundamentally. And
Well,
that's what I was talking.
very quickly to remind everybody, in the not too long ago, in the early years, early months of the Trump presidency, uh, Greenland was a subject of American attention. America wanted to buy Greenland. Then Donald Trump talked about Canada as a part of the US. Then, of course, the US, which had egged Europe on to support Ukraine during the Russia Ukraine war, basically seemed to do a volte-face or an about turn and abandon Europe. And abandon Ukraine. And then the Iran war, the US Israel Iran war, that came without consultation, and that has led to the biggest supply shock in the history of the global economy in some ways.
Right.
That came from left field. And so the Europeans at the moment are feeling particularly aggrieved, vulnerable, and indeed colonized by the US. In fact, Rory Stewart gave the example of Europe being a battered wife in an abusive relationship who cannot walk out of the marriage.
Exactly right. The Greenland example, I don't think that the Americans really understand how traumatic that was. Trump makes these outrageous statements, and for a while it's in the news. Then he moves on, and then it's Canada, and then it's this, and that's the other thing. And in this was a direct attack on NATO, or a threat. This is a direct threat to NATO. There were Germans, it was only a couple of hundred, but there were German soldiers that went to Greenland when that event was happening and were prepared to die to protect Greenland, a NATO country. I mean, just think about that, Atul, for 2 secs. This is not going to go away out of the memory of the Danes for sure, but also the Europeans. That's what it tells them. NATO is just now something on paper and not necessarily something real. And so that's what I mean. But I don't know if we can just go back to normal no matter who's in power. This is going to be built into assumptions and calculations,
Understood. So what you're saying is that the rupture with Canada can be repaired to some degree, but the rupture with the EU, with Europe, is much more longer lasting. And
I
yes,
think.
there will be a reversion to mean because interests may be aligned on many things, but the return to the old order is impossible. Something new resembling the old order will emerge after we pass through this period of turmoil.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, it's just like, I mean, Rory Stewart called it, the abusive relationship. That's traumatic, right? You don't forget those kinds of things. And this is a trauma that, if it had, like I said, if it had just been the first Trump administration, I think we could have gone on it. But now it's gone on too long. It's too fundamental. Yeah. So.
Excellent. Elliot Neaman, thank you very, very much for your time. We'll have you back. This was a great conversation. And those of you who read Fair Observer, follow us, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel, press the bell icon so that you can get notifications. Go to our website, sign up for the newsletter, and look for Elliot Neaman's profile on Fair Observer, and you can read all his wonderful articles.
Thank you so much, Atul. It was a real pleasure talking to you. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you, sir.
Join the conversation at Fair Observer and subscribe to our YouTube channel.